You could be surrounded by everyone and still feel like no one truly sees you. That kind of loneliness, the invisible kind, isn't about being alone. It's about being surrounded by voices, laughter, conversation, and still feeling like you're on the outside looking in, like something essential about you is too different to ever be understood. You were probably that kid who asked questions no one wanted to answer. The one who didn't just hear words but felt the energy behind them. You sensed moods before anyone spoke, noticed tensions others ignored, felt everything more deeply than the world seemed to think was necessary. And somewhere along the way, people started calling that too much. Too sensitive, too serious, too quiet, too intense. You started to wonder if maybe they were right, that maybe you were the problem. So you tried to shrink yourself, fit in, blend, be what they needed you to be. But what if that ache inside you isn't something broken? What if it's the sound of your soul knocking again and again, asking you to stop pretending? Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say is that becoming yourself often means standing alone. It means letting go of the roles you learned to play, the masks you wore to keep the peace, the version of yourself others found comfortable. It's not an easy path. It feels like exile, like you've been cast out even when no one's actually pushed you away. You can be in a crowded room and feel like a ghost, laugh when you're supposed to, not at the right time. But inside there's a quiet voice whispering, "This isn't me." That voice is the truth. And the truth doesn't always blend in. You might have spent years trying to adjust, bending yourself into shapes that made others more comfortable. You smiled when you were in pain. You stayed silent when everything in you wanted to scream. You became a shapeshifter, a master of masks, convincing everyone, sometimes even yourself, that you belonged. But deep down, you knew. You knew something was missing. You weren't being seen. Not the real you. Maybe you were never supposed to fit in. Maybe your discomfort is a compass. Maybe your sensitivity is sacred. Maybe what others dismiss as strange is actually your gift. The ability to feel what they're afraid to feel, to ask what they're afraid to ask. The world often calls it weakness, but it might just be wisdom. That ache you carry, the one that makes you feel like you don't belong anywhere, it's not weakness, it's a sign that your soul's awake. It's a sign that you weren't made for shallow living, you weren't made for noise and pretending and surface level talk. You were made to see, to feel, to search. And in a world addicted to the artificial, that can feel like a burden. But it's not. It's a calling. You may find yourself tired of conversations that don't go anywhere, exhausted by people chasing things that mean nothing to you, drained by rooms full of noise but empty of truth. And it's easy to assume the problem is you, that you're failing to adapt. But what if you're just evolving? What if you're growing into someone the world isn't ready for? Highly intuitive people often feel like they're drowning in a world built for numbness. You don't just hear what people say. You hear what they don't say. You feel the weight of unspoken grief, sense the tension beneath polite smiles. While others move through life untouched, you absorb everything. And that kind of perception can feel like both a curse and a blessing. Because while they reward sameness, your soul craves truth. While they applaud perfection, your spirit wants authenticity. While they chase comfort, you're drawn to meaning. And every time you try to bury that instinct, you lose a little more of yourself. You play the part. You say the right things. But the voice inside you never goes quiet. It keeps whispering, "This isn't it. This isn't who you are." You don't want to dream someone else's dream. You want to wake up in your own life. Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Maybe it's time. Maybe the pain of not belonging was never a punishment. Maybe it was an invitation. Not to fit in, but to return. To who you were before the world taught you to hide. The ache begins quietly. Not as a scream, but as a whisper deep within your bones. It doesn't come from something broken inside you. It rises from a truth that refuses to stay buried. A part of you knows. You were never meant to live a life that fits neatly within the lines. You were made to feel, to sense, to remember. And slowly, painfully, you begin to realize that the discomfort wasn't a flaw. It was a message. A callback to something real. You've tried. You've played the game. Worn the masks. Laughed at jokes that didn't land in your heart. Nodded in rooms where your silence held more meaning than the words flying around you. You've dimmed your light to make others comfortable. Bit your tongue when your soul wanted to speak. And in doing so, You've betrayed something sacred within yourself. That gnawing sense of not belonging, it isn't because you're broken. It's because you remember a deeper way of being, a truer way of seeing. You walk through the world and feel things no one talks about. You sense the fracture behind polished smiles. You notice what others rush past, and sometimes just being around people feels like too much. Not because you're cold, but because you're porous. You absorb what others pretend isn't there. And when you try to explain it, you're told you're overthinking, overfeeling, overreacting. So you retreat, not in fear, but in quiet protection of something fragile and precious within you. You start carrying it all in silence. But that silence isn't empty. It's heavy with knowing you're not alone because there's nothing inside you. You're alone because there's too much. Too much depth for small talk. Too much vision for surface games. And too much truth for a world that worships illusions. You've probably wondered what's wrong with you. Why connection feels distant. Why the roles handed to you never quite fit. But maybe there's nothing wrong at all. Maybe you're wired differently for a reason. Not to follow, but to lead. Not to blend, but to illuminate. The path you walk isn't meant to mimic the crowd. It's meant to challenge it, reshape it, call it back to what it forgot. Some souls are born with a different compass. They don't chase belonging because they carry a map to something more enduring, authenticity. Carl Jung saw this pattern again and again. The ones who couldn't play the part, who stood at the edge, watching, sensing, never quite stepping in. He knew that within these people lived an archetypal force, an ancient energy that refused to be silenced, the outsider. Not just someone who doesn't fit in, but someone whose very presence reminds the world of what it's missing, that marginal space you've been pushed into. It isn't exile, it's initiation. It teaches you to see without filters, to sense without distractions. You walk into rooms and feel the undercurrents no one else speaks of. You ask questions that rattle comfort zones. You resist the unspoken codes that others follow blindly. That's not defiance, that's clarity. And clarity often makes people uncomfortable, because it strips away pretense. It exposes truths they'd rather avoid. Your very being becomes a mirror, reflecting what others don't want to see. And that's a heavy burden to carry, but it's also a sacred gift. This is the path of individuation, the journey home to your own soul. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about unlearning who you were told to be. It's the breaking away from the mask, from the noise, from the pull of conformity, and stepping into the wild truth of your own essence. You might feel it in archetypes that speak to something ancient in you. The wounded healer who transforms their own scars into medicine for others. The hermit who retreats not to escape, but to hear the voice beneath the noise. The seer who cannot ignore what others refuse to see, who speaks the unspeakable because silence would be betrayal. These aren't fantasies. They are blueprints, living energies etched into the bones of people like you. You are not too much. You are not enough. You are exactly what the world forgets it needs. Your depth is not a flaw, it's a frequency. Your sensitivity is not weakness, it's wisdom. You feel out of place not because something is lacking in you, but because something is profoundly alive. And maybe, just maybe, you weren't meant to find a place in the world as it is. Maybe you're here to help it remember what it could be. They've always misunderstood the ones who feel deeply. Maybe you've heard it before, like that you're too intense, too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But too much is just more than most are willing to feel. You've probably tried to quiet it down, to shrink yourself, to be easier for others to handle. But no matter how much you twist and bend, some part of you refuses to disappear. That part is your soul. It's the part that won't settle for surface-level conversations or shallow connections. It's the part that aches when you're surrounded by people who don't see you, not really. And still, you stayed silent, carrying your story like a weight, knowing most people wouldn't understand. But you weren't meant to stay quiet. That story inside you isn't a burden, it's a key. Not for everyone, but for the ones who are ready to unlock their own truth. You're not broken, you're a mirror. And mirrors don't always get welcomed with open arms. They make people see what they've buried, what they've avoided. Your difference doesn't mean rejection. It means you were called to something else, something deeper. You weren't born to blend in. You were born to wake people up, even if they don't realize it until much later. You've spent years trying to tone it down, trying to shape yourself into someone they could accept. But the discomfort never left. That quiet feeling of misalignment lingered because your soul never came here to mimic someone else's path. It came here to live with depth, to feel fully, to speak truth even in silence. That kind of presence was never meant to fit into small spaces. Jung said the self doesn't need validation to be real. It just needs room to emerge. And when you finally stop wrestling with your nature, when you allow your true self to take up space, then that's when everything starts to shift. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to be understood to be real. Your power grows the moment you stop needing permission. You begin to see your sensitivity not as weakness, but as a kind of knowing. You see your solitude not as isolation, but as sacred ground. You understand that your hunger for meaning isn't something to suppress. It's a memory of truth, something your soul carried here long before the noise of the world told you to forget. And once you accept that, you stop building your life around approval. You start shaping it around what energizes you, what heals you. You let peace be your baseline, not chaos. You say no without guilt. You allow quiet to become your teacher. And from that stillness, a different kind of strength rises, one that doesn't need to convince or chase. It simply is. You live in such a way that your very presence speaks louder than words. There's something in your calm and your groundedness that others feel. Not everyone will understand it, but the ones who are meant to will. Without effort, you become a signal. Your authenticity drawing in what aligns, repelling what doesn't. You're no longer trying to change the world with noise. You're changing it by becoming the part of it that already remembers. To fully accept yourself. That's the terrifying part, Jung said. But it's also the beginning of freedom. So if you've always felt different, maybe that's because you were never meant to follow the path laid out before you. Maybe you're the first to see through old patterns. The first to want meaning instead of distraction. The first to walk a road that doesn't yet have a name. That's not exile, that's purpose. You're not here to play a part in someone else's story. You're here to become who you truly are. And in doing so, you light the way. You carry a vibration that shakes illusions and makes space for others to feel something real. You don't need status or permission. You just need to be what you already are, that ache you've always carried. It's not confusion, it's calling, and you were never lost. Just waiting to align. You're not too much. You're exactly enough for what you came here to do. You weren't made to fit. You were made to remember.